King Hezekiah, the power of prayer. A kingdom under siege, when fear meets faith. The dust on Jerusalem's streets didn't settle anymore. It carried whispers, rumors from travelers, messengers, soldiers, each one more chilling than the last. Assyria was coming. And not just coming, it was swallowing nations whole. City after city fell like dry leaves before a storm. And now it was Judah's turn. Hezekiah stood on the wall and saw it with his own eyes. The Assyrian army, vast like the sea, encamped outside his gates. They weren't just warriors, they were professionals in terror. They didn't just conquer, they humiliated, mocked, dismantled every identity their victims once held. And the question hovered in the air like smoke: where is your God now? It wasn't the first time Hezekiah had faced pressure. As king, he had inherited a kingdom riddled with compromise. His father, Ahaz, had sold pieces of the temple, closed its doors, and built altars to foreign gods. Judah had bent toward idolatry like a sapling toward sunless skies. But Hezekiah was different. He reopened the temple. He tore down the high places. He cleansed the priesthood. He led the people back to Yahweh. He wasn't perfect, but he was faithful. And now that same faith was being tested. Because revival does not exempt you from warfare. Sometimes it invites it. Hezekiah could have tried to negotiate. Could have leaned on alliances. Egypt, perhaps. Maybe diplomacy. Maybe surrender. But instead he stood still. Not because he had answers, but because he had faith. This is the collision we all come to sooner or later. The place where what you believe meets what threatens you. When the enemy is louder than your confidence. When the siege isn't just physical, it's mental, emotional, spiritual. When you can't sleep, not because you lack courage, but because fear has parked itself outside your gates and refuses to leave. And yet, Hezekiah didn't run. He didn't rant. He didn't panic. He prepared. Then he turned his eyes upward. The Assyrians mocked. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. Your God will not save you. But Hezekiah knew something they didn't. Judah had a history with the living God. A covenant, a promise, a legacy. Fear pressed in, but faith leaned harder. If you're reading this today with your own siege camped outside your heart, threats you can't control, voices that mock your obedience, pressures too heavy to articulate, know this: you are not the first to stand on trembling walls with your hands lifted to heaven. And you will not be the last to watch God move in response. Say this aloud now, as Hezekiah once must have whispered: my God is greater than the noise. My covenant is older than this crisis. Hezekiah's strength wasn't in his army. It was in his posture. He didn't just rule a kingdom. He bowed to a greater one. If this part of Hezekiah's journey stirs something in you, share it. There are others standing on walls right now, unsure if their faith will hold. Comment: what siege are you facing that feels overwhelming? Tag someone who needs the reminder that their posture matters more than their power. And declare this today: I may be under siege, but I'm under God's covering first. The letter from the enemy, when the threat becomes personal. It didn't arrive like a whisper. It arrived like a challenge. A letter, sealed with arrogance, written with contempt, delivered by messengers who didn't hide their smirks. It was not just an ultimatum. It was a declaration of humiliation. The king of Assyria, Sennacherib, had penned it himself. A scroll of blasphemy. A taunt draped in ink. Every word pulsed with venom. Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you. Look around. Every nation we faced, we crushed. Every God they cried out to, we silenced. What makes you think your God is any different? It wasn't just an attack on Hezekiah. It was a direct insult to Yahweh. And this is how the enemy still works. He doesn't always come with swords and armies. Sometimes he writes letters. Words sent straight to your doorstep. words of fear, shame, defeat. Sometimes it's not a physical siege. It's the letter you just opened, the diagnosis you didn't expect, the bank account that won't stretch, the rejection email, the legal notice, the message that shakes your soul. Hezekiah read the scroll, and he did something most of us forget to do. He went up to the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. 2 Kings 19 verse 14. He didn't keep it bottled. He didn't argue back. He didn't let his palace become a prison of panic. He carried the enemy's words into God's presence and unrolled the letter on holy ground. This is the power of posture in crisis. Hezekiah didn't pretend to be strong. He didn't drown in self-pity. He simply said, "Here it is, Lord. This is what they're saying. You see it. You read it. I need you." Sometimes faith looks like this, spreading the threat before the one who already knew it was coming. What if the next time fear wrote you a letter, you didn't panic? You prayed. What if instead of rehearsing the worst, you released the weight? What if you carried the enemy's handwriting into the throne room and said, "Father, this letter wasn't addressed to just me, it came to your child. So I'm returning it to sender, heaven's way." Whisper this now as a declaration. I won't carry what I can lay down. I won't battle what God has already claimed. The enemy may write with bold ink, but his words hold no authority in God's house. Hezekiah prayed not as a politician, but as a son. He reminded God, not because God forgets, but because faith is activated in remembrance. You alone are God. You made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Hezekiah was honest, reverent, and heaven listened. If you're holding a letter today, whether it's in your hands, your inbox, or your memory, spread it before the Lord. Don't just read it. Don't just weep over it. Lay it down. Let this story remind you, when the threat becomes personal, your prayer must become powerful. If this chapter touched you, share it. Someone else is carrying a scroll of fear and needs to know they don't have to carry it alone. Comment below. What letter has the enemy used to shake your faith lately? Tag someone who needs this story. And speak this aloud over your situation. I spread my fear before the Lord, and He will answer. Spreading it before the Lord, when prayer becomes warfare. It didn't look like a battlefield. There were no chariots, no archers, no horns of war. Only a quiet king, a scroll of threats, and a sanctuary cloaked in reverent stillness. But make no mistake, war was being waged. Hezekiah didn't stand on the ramparts that day. He didn't issue commands to generals or forge new alliances. He climbed the steps of the temple with trembling hands, carrying words soaked in mockery and fear. And he did what warriors of God always do when they are outnumbered. He knelt. This was not weakness. This was war. Hezekiah spread the letter from Sennacherib before the Lord, line by blasphemous line. Not to inform God, but to invite Him into the confrontation. Because prayer isn't a last resort. It is the first weapon of the faithful. And here is the prayer of a king who knew who held the real power. O Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Save us, O Lord our God, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God. 2 Kings 19 verses 15 to 19. Hezekiah didn't begin by naming the problem. He began by naming the greatness of God. He exalted God before exposing the threat. He lifted praise before pleading for protection. Because true prayer isn't just a list of needs. It's a declaration of who rules. Hezekiah knew something most of us forget in crisis. The enemy may speak loudly, but God speaks finally. And so he waged war, not with weapons but with worship. Right there in the temple, a shift happened in the spirit. Not a sword was drawn, but the heavens were moved. Not a drop of blood was shed by Judah, but soon the battlefield would be soaked in divine intervention. Because when a child of God prays in humility and faith, heaven responds like thunder. Friend, you may not be surrounded by soldiers, but if your peace is under siege, then your prayer life must rise as your defense. Prayer is how we hand over the battle. Prayer is how we take our hands off the outcome. Prayer is how we silence the roar of the enemy and tune our ears to the whisper of God. Say this now boldly: Lord, I spread this before you. I'm not fighting this alone. Hezekiah's cry wasn't poetic, it was desperate. And that's exactly what moved God. You don't need fancy words. You don't need the right formula. You need to bring your burden and lay it on holy ground. If you've been trying to fight in your own strength, pause. Spread it before the Lord. There's power in surrender. There's warfare in worship. And there's victory in the voice that cries out, not to men, but to the one enthroned above. If this moved you to rethink your prayer life, share it. Someone needs to be reminded that prayer is not passive, it's powerful. Comment: what do you need to lay down in prayer today? Tag someone who's been in a silent war of their own. And declare this: my greatest battles will be won in the place of prayer. The God who answers when one prayer changes everything. Hezekiah never left the temple with a drawn sword. He didn't walk away with a chariot formation or a war strategy. He left with something far more powerful, a word. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because you have prayed to me concerning Sennacherib king of Assyria, I have heard you. 2 Kings 19 verse 20. Because you have prayed, not because you were strong, not because your army was ready, not because you outnumbered the enemy, but because you prayed. One prayer can shake the heavens and shift the earth. One whisper in the throne room can dismantle 1,000 threats on the battlefield. While Sennacherib boasted and blasphemed, while soldiers sharpened swords and tightened siege lines, heaven had already responded, but not in a way the world expected. That night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. 2 Kings 19 verse 35. One angel, one night, one move of God. What men had feared for months ended without a single arrow fired by Judah, because the battle was never theirs to fight. It's humbling and thrilling to realize that God can answer in silence, that He can act while you sleep, that sometimes the most earth-shattering victory doesn't come after striving, but surrender. This is what makes prayer powerful. It's not about length. It's not about eloquence. It's about authority and who you give it to. Hezekiah could have given authority to fear. He could have handed the crown to doubt. He could have submitted to the enemy's threats. But instead he gave authority to God. And God answered. Sennacherib, the king who mocked the living God, returned to his land in defeat and died at the hand of his own sons. The man who tried to rewrite history with arrogance couldn't escape the final word of heaven. Friend, hear this clearly: prayer still changes things. Your voice may feel small, but it touches the throne. Your enemy may feel massive, but he's no match for a single move of God. Say this aloud now: because I prayed, heaven is moving, even if I can't see it yet. Sometimes God answers suddenly. Sometimes He answers quietly. But He always answers faithfully. Your prayer might not always change the situation immediately, but it will always change the atmosphere. It invites God into the battle. It rearranges authority. It silences hell and invites heaven. If this encouraged your heart, share it with someone who feels outnumbered. Comment below: what victory have you seen in your life through prayer? Tag someone who needs to hear, because you prayed, God heard you. And speak this aloud: I may not have an army, but I have access to the throne. The final years. What Hezekiah's story teaches us about legacy. The siege had ended. The enemy had vanished overnight. The city was safe and Judah breathed again. But victory is never the end of the story. Because sometimes the harder test is not the threat before the breakthrough, it's what happens after God answers. Hezekiah had witnessed one of the most miraculous deliverances in biblical history. He had seen what prayer could do. He had watched heaven move with holy fury and silence an army. But the next chapter of his life would test something far quieter: his heart. Not long after the victory, Hezekiah became deathly ill. The prophet Isaiah came with what felt like a death sentence. "Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live." 2 Kings 20 verse 1. It should have been the end. But Hezekiah did what he knew best. He turned his face to the wall. He wept. And he prayed. "Remember now, O Lord, I beseech you, how I have walked before you in truth and with a loyal heart." 2 Kings 20 verse 3. And God did something few ever experience. He reversed the death decree. "I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Behold, I will heal you, and I will add 15 years to your life." 2 Kings 20 verses 5 to 6. Another miracle. Another answer. Another sign of divine intimacy. But this time, something subtle began to shift. When Babylon heard of Hezekiah's recovery, they sent messengers with gifts. And Hezekiah, perhaps eager to impress, perhaps careless in his confidence, showed them everything: his storehouses, his treasures, his weapons, his strength. And Isaiah returned with a chilling word: "Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house shall be carried off to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, and some of your own sons shall be taken away." 2 Kings 20 verses 17 to 18. It was a prophecy of exile, not for Hezekiah, but for the generations after him. And here is where the weight of legacy lands heavy. Hezekiah said, "The word of the Lord is good." For he thought, "Why not, if there will be peace and security in my days?" 2 Kings 20 verse 19. Peace in his days, but at the cost of others. Hezekiah, the king who once prayed for his people with passion, now seemed to shrink his concern to just himself. This is the warning woven into the legacy of a man of prayer. Answered prayer must be followed by surrendered pride. Victory must not dull your vigilance. Legacy is not just what you accomplish, it's what you leave behind. Hezekiah started well. He taught us that prayer can shake kingdoms. He proved that intimacy with God can rewrite outcomes. But in the end, his vision narrowed. His passion cooled. His decisions planted seeds that others would reap. So what does his story teach us? 1. Miracles are not permission to relax. Every answered prayer should make us lean in closer, not lean back. 2. Legacy is bigger than your lifetime. What you do today, what you prioritize, what you expose, what you steward, echoes into generations. 3. Humility must follow every high place. When God promotes you, guards your heart. When He adds years to your life, fill them with eternal things, not just comfort. Say this out loud: Lord, help me finish well. Let my legacy honor you, not just my lifetime. Friend, you may have seen victories. You may have testimonies. But don't let the comfort of answered prayers rob you of your calling to serve beyond yourself. The final chapters matter just as much as the first ones. If this chapter convicted or awakened something in you, share it. Many are walking in blessing, but forgetting the burden that comes with it. Comment below, what kind of legacy do you want to leave? Tag someone you're praying for in their final stretch of obedience. And speak this over your own journey: my legacy will be prayer-fueled, Spirit-led, and Jesus-centered, to the very end. The end.